Imagine buying a car, driving it across the equivalent of going to the moon and back, and the battery's still working better than most people expected. That sounds impossible, but it actually happened, and the data behind it will completely change the way you think about electric vehicles forever. We are talking about real owners, real numbers, and real surprises that the automotive industry did not see coming. Some of these findings are so unexpected that even the engineers who designed these cars were caught off guard. Before we dive deep into this story, if you find this kind of content fascinating, make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below telling us if you would ever commit to an EV for 300,000 miles. This journey begins with a simple question that nobody in the early days of EVs could confidently answer. What actually happens to a battery that has been through hundreds of thousands of miles of real-world punishment? The answer involves chemistry, heat cycles, software updates, and some genuinely surprising human stories. And the deeper you look, the more extraordinary the reality becomes. Because the cars that survived this journey did not just survive. They revealed something that changes the entire conversation about the future of transportation. To understand what 300,000 miles really means, you need to picture it properly. That distance is roughly equivalent to circling the entire Earth more than 12 times, and most internal combustion engines begin showing serious fatigue well before crossing that milestone. But here is where things get interesting. The most documented long-distance EV in history, a Tesla Model S owned by a German data analyst named Hans-Georg Geckel, crossed 600,000 miles before his battery required major attention, and even then the car was still operational. Most drivers never realize that EV batteries do not die suddenly like a traditional engine seizing up. Instead, they degrade gradually, and the rate of that degradation is where the real story hides. Early Tesla data showed that after 300,000 miles, many Model S and Model X batteries retained somewhere between 80 and 88% of their original capacity, which is a figure that stunned analysts in the traditional automotive sector. What makes this even crazier is that the degradation curve is not linear. It drops faster in the first 50,000 miles, then flattens dramatically, meaning a car with 200,000 miles actually loses capacity at a slower rate than a nearly new one. The chemistry behind this involves lithium-ion cells stabilizing their internal structure over time, a process engineers call the formation of a stable SEI layer or solid electrolyte interface. And that detail alone quietly dismantles one of the biggest fears people have about owning an electric vehicle long-term. But the battery is only part of the story, and perhaps not even the most surprising part. What shocks most people who study high-mileage EV ownership is just how few moving parts actually fail over these distances. A traditional gasoline engine contains hundreds of components that require regular replacement. Timing belts, spark plugs, water pumps, fuel injectors, alternators, clutches, exhaust systems, and so much more. An electric motor, by contrast, has essentially one moving part, the rotor spinning inside a magnetic field, and that simplicity translates directly into reduced mechanical failure over time. Owners who reached 300,000 miles on their EVs consistently reported that their biggest expenses were tires, brake fluid, and occasional suspension components, not powertrain repairs. And braking is another revelation entirely, because regenerative braking systems recover energy while slowing the car down, which dramatically reduces wear on physical brake pads. Some 300,000-mile EV owners reported needing only 1 or 2 sets of brake pads over the entire lifetime of the car, compared to 5 or 6 sets that would be typical on a gasoline vehicle covering the same distance. If this is opening your eyes to something you never considered before, share this video with someone who thinks EVs are unreliable, subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments what part of this has surprised you the most, because we want to hear your reaction. The maintenance picture at this mileage level is not just better than expected. It is genuinely revolutionary compared to everything the automotive world was built around for over a century. And yet there is one category of failure that does appear more often than EV advocates like to admit, and it has nothing to do with the motor or the battery. That category is electronics and software, and it represents the hidden complexity of modern EVs that most buyers never fully consider. At 300,000 miles, high-mileage EV owners consistently report that the most common repairs involve thermal management systems, charging port components, and onboard computer modules rather than mechanical drivetrain parts. The thermal management system in particular deserves far more attention than it gets, because it is essentially the guardian of the entire battery pack. It regulates temperature during charging, during driving, and during extreme weather conditions, and when it works perfectly, it extends battery life dramatically. When it fails or degrades, It accelerates battery degradation in ways that can cost thousands of dollars to address. Tesla actually made over-the-air software updates a core part of their strategy to extend battery longevity, meaning owners who kept their software updated benefited from improved battery management algorithms that were not available when the car was originally purchased. What makes this even more fascinating is that some owners effectively received a better car than the one they bought, simply through software improvements delivered while they slept. There is no parallel to this in the traditional automotive world, where a 2012 vehicle stays mechanically identical to the day it left the factory. But there is one detail almost nobody talks about when it comes to high-mileage EVs, and it involves something called calendar aging, which affects your battery even when the car is just sitting in your garage doing absolutely nothing. Calendar aging is the process by which lithium-ion cells degrade simply due to the passage of time and their chemical state, completely independent of how many miles you drive. A battery kept at 100% charge continuously experiences significantly more calendar aging than one maintained at around 50 to 80%, which is why most EV manufacturers now program their cars to recommend daily charging limits that stop short of full capacity. This is not a software glitch or a limitation. It is a deliberate engineering choice based on electrochemical science, and owners who understood and followed these recommendations saw meaningfully better battery health at high mileages compared to those who constantly charged to 100% every night. The Geotab study, one of the most comprehensive real-world analyses of EV battery degradation ever published, analyzed data from over 6,000 vehicles and found that average annual degradation was just 2.3% per year, which means a battery would still retain around 75% of its capacity after an entire decade of typical use. What happened next shocked everyone who assumed EVs would become expensive liabilities within a few years. The real-world resale data showed that high-mileage EVs were holding their value better than comparable high-mileage gasoline vehicles in certain segments, largely because buyers trusted the drivetrains more than the engines in aging combustion cars. And there is a human story buried inside these numbers that almost never gets told, a story about people who drove these cars not out of environmental conviction but simply because the economics made undeniable sense over time. One fleet operator in Norway documented over 1.2 million total kilometers across their EV fleet with zero motor replacements, a figure that would have been considered fantasy just 15 years ago. Now here is something that almost nobody in the automotive world discusses openly, and it has the potential to completely reframe how you think about the cost of driving 300,000 miles in an electric vehicle. When researchers at the University of Michigan compared the total energy cost of powering an EV versus a gasoline car over the same distance, the numbers were striking in ways that go far beyond simple fuel savings. The average EV driver in the United States spends roughly half the amount per mile on energy compared to someone driving a gasoline car with average fuel economy, and that gap widens even further for drivers who charge primarily at home during off-peak electricity hours. But what makes this even crazier is that the savings compound over time in a way that mirrors investment growth rather than simple arithmetic subtraction. A driver who covers 300,000 miles in an EV over 15 years could realistically pocket savings of between $15,000 and $30,000 in fuel costs alone, depending on local electricity and gasoline prices, and that figure does not yet account for the dramatically reduced maintenance bill. Some analysts who tracked individual owner expenses found that the total cost of ownership for a high-mileage EV, when properly calculated across the full 300,000-mile lifespan, was comparable to or lower than a budget economy car running on gasoline. And buried inside those numbers is a detail that challenges one of the most persistent myths about electric vehicles, that they are vehicles for the wealthy. The long-term math increasingly suggests the opposite, and the owners who figured this out early have been quietly benefiting from it for years while the broader public debate remains stuck on purchase price alone. There is one more dimension to this story that rarely gets the spotlight it deserves, and it involves what happens to the human beings who live with these cars across hundreds of thousands of miles. Long-term EV owners who participated in studies and online communities consistently described something unexpected, a shift in the way they thought about driving itself. The instant torque delivery, the silence of the cabin, the smooth and predictable power curve, and the habit of waking up every morning to a full charge without ever visiting a gas station gradually transformed their relationship with transportation in ways they had not anticipated. Several owners described the experience of never stopping for fuel again as quietly liberating, a small but psychologically significant removal of friction from daily life that added up enormously over years of ownership. What happened next in these communities shocked researchers studying EV adoption. Owners with the highest mileage vehicles were consistently among the most vocal advocates not because they were paid to be, but because their lived experience had genuinely converted them. And this is where things get interesting from a sociological perspective, because the 300,000-mile EV owner represents something entirely new in automotive history, a driver who has put more trust in an electric powertrain than any previous generation ever had the opportunity to, and whose verdict is now coming back overwhelmingly positive. Most drivers never realize that the longest journeys are often the ones that reveal the deepest truths about a machine, and the truth these cars revealed over 300,000 miles is that the future of driving arrived quieter, smoother, and more reliably than almost anyone predicted. So what does all of this mean if you are standing at the edge of a decision about whether an EV can truly last the distance you need it to? The evidence gathered from real owners, independent researchers, fleet operators, and engineering analyses tells a story that is more optimistic than the automotive mainstream was willing to believe just a decade ago. The motors are proving extraordinarily durable. The batteries are degrading more slowly than projected. The software is actively improving the vehicles over time. And the total cost of ownership over 300,000 miles is, in many documented cases, significantly lower than a comparable gasoline vehicle once you factor in fuel, maintenance, and repair costs across the full distance. But perhaps the most important insight of all is this: the cars that lasted longest were the ones driven by owners who understood their vehicle, respected its charging behavior, maintained its thermal systems, and treated it as a precision instrument rather than just a machine to be used carelessly. That relationship between driver and technology is something entirely new in automotive history, and it hints at a future where vehicles are not just tools but adaptive systems that respond to how well you understand them. If this video changed the way you think about electric vehicles and long-distance ownership, then please subscribe to this channel right now, like this video so more people can find it, share it with someone who is on the fence about making the switch, and leave a comment below telling us exactly what surprised you the most about what happens when you drive an EV for 300,000 miles. The conversation about the future of driving is happening right now, and you are already part of it.